Come on in, everybody. Have a seat. Thank you for coming. So this is another in our Shower of Stars, the SOJC Research Series. I should admit. And I thought I would start with a little bit of music because without it, I wouldn't be here. So stuff like this. I'm 9 years old. So this is like a voice from across the abyss saying, hey, leave it to Beaver. There's another world out here. And I'm here because I had a radio, like everybody else. I mean, to this day. Dwayne Eddie, are you kidding me? I mean, my little 9-year-old brain was scrambled by all this stuff. Of course. So this sound of rockabilly. Come in, Troy. There's one over there, I hear. I'm going to play a solo. This is James Burton with Ricky Nelson. All right, look out. I mean, I never had a chance after this. Take another one. Let me find this solo here. Why, every household should have at least one Telecaster right here. Okay, we need to get started. Thank you, Torsten and Maria, for making me look cool in these.
A monkey with an autofocus camera can make you look cool.
So this is the part of my research that we're not going to look at today. I've done a lot of work in the ethics of manipulating imagery, maybe a discussion for another day. This is a big part of what I do. Here's another quote, I'll share it with you. I've researched 80-some guitar companies, but in recent years, I've concentrated a lot on Fender. This is me in high school when I was listening to this stuff, a few years older, with my first Fender guitar. It's my most recent Fender. It's what they call a presentation grade. There are only two of them. I have number 2. Mrs. Fender has number 1. I play as often as I can. Jeff is here. Playing with Deb Cleveland is one of the biggest joys of my life. We're lucky to have her in this town. And it's not only the most fun I've ever had playing music, but Deb and Davon and Denali are in the family to me. I first started writing about the intersection of rock and roll and culture and legalities when I was in school, when I was in law school. Drug Lyrics, the FCC, the First Amendment is a free speech article about songs that are being banned on the radio by Nixon and Agnew. I've always been interested in this stuff. A reverend telling his congregation, Elvis Presley is morally insane, and he's leading other young people to the same end. I mean, even when I was a little kid, I really thought a lot about all that. Another went to a concert, said that it was like Moses coming down from Sinai, finding the children of Israel in religious emotion before the golden calf. Trying to capture the enormity of the Rolling Stones, I once wrote this, which just cracked me up, and I just thought it was just so nitpicky. So these are my guitar books. Here's Happy Guy with this is an Eric Johnson model Stratocaster that used to belong to Eric Johnson. So a lot of my guitars have their own stories, but I'm showing you this. This is a number of international. editions of my books, Japanese, Dutch, UK, German, etc. So I played a little bit of James Burton. When I was 9 or 10 years old, watching The Adventures of Oz and Harriet with Mom and Dad, the underrated Ricky Nelson on occasion would sing, and the camera would cut away to this guy. We didn't know his name for years. It turned out to be James Burton, unbelievably influential. I saw him with Elvis. The first year Elvis came out of retirement, he was slim and electrifying, and James Burton burned it down. And he was also the original guitar player in the hot band with Emmylou Harris, whom we sort of worship in my household, succeeded by our dear friend Albert Lee. So I had a chance, I serve on Fender's Hall of Fame Selection Committee, and I had the distinct honor of inducting James into Fender's Hall of Fame, and to explain to the industry the impact that he had on generations of guitar players, a great honor. Les Paul was always very kind to me. About him I once wrote, in terms of impact, in terms of redefining what a guitar could do, what it meant, what it is, he had no equal until the arrival of Jimi Hendrix. So here's a moment, here's young Tom at far right having a conversation, no words. I think the grins say a lot. This is a heck of a jam session, I must say. This David Bromberg is a fine artist in his own right. Chick Corea is on keyboards. And one of the reasons we're all grinning is we're having a conversation going back and forth, and I'm playing every B.B. King lick I know, and he knows it, and everybody knows it, and it's just my little way of saying, thank you for a tiny little slice of what you've given all of us. So this is a bridge here that happens all over the world every day. It's a big part of why I do what I do. This conversation is a bridge across a generation, across race, across different life experience. Eric Clapton, Steve Van Zandt in the Rolling Stone Immortals issue once wrote, Eric Clapton is the most important influential guitar player who's ever lived, is still living, or ever will live. Do yourself a favor and don't debate me on this. Our dear friend Billy Gibbons, Ann and I have consumed enormous vats of wine with this gentleman and had wonderful conversations into the wee hours. The first time I got together with him, we sang Buddy Holly songs at the top of our lungs. There might have been some alcohol involved. Eric Johnson, whose music is just transcendent. It's like going to heaven. And I mentioned these 7 guitar players. Oh, the inimitable force of nature that is Keith Richards. And I mention these players because I've been so fortunate. These are the artists who have written the forewords for my 7 guitar books. I started the guitar book when I was in law school, forwarded by B.B. King. That's the revision. This is my most influential book, forwarded by Eric Clapton. It's an encyclopedia. You can probably imagine what it meant to a member of my generation to have your work acknowledged, unsolicited by George Harrison. These are 4 of the books I've written since arriving at the SOJC. The Stratocaster Chronicles, forwarded by Eric Clapton. The Soul of Tone, thank you, Anne, for inspiring. The Title is Perfect, forwarded by Keith Richards. The Dream Factory, about the Fender Custom Shop, forwarded by its foremost patron, Billy Gibbons, and Stratocaster Continues, which is a follow-up to the Chronicles, forwarded by Eric Johnson. It's my latest book, forwarded by one of my childhood heroes, along with my dad and Chuck Berry, James Burton. It's got a bunch of pockets and sleeves and envelopes, and you can take out authentic reproductions of diagrams, letters, a telegram, blueprints. I love all that sort of stuff. Of course, if you write books now, you're going to have some kind of social media component. Fortunately for me, I don't have to deal with it. The publisher handles all that stuff. a lot of this has permeated my classes, not just writing about the arts or journalism, arts, multimedia, but to some degree, all of them. I'm going to show you a few layouts. I've been so fortunate to work with wonderful photographers and designers over the years, and they make these books look really quite beautiful. The artists that I work with, they cover almost every kind of art I can imagine, from pinstriping to woodworking. And I love this kind of stuff, finding works in progress and then seeing how they play out. I think it's just unbelievable. De los Muertos inlay here on this instrument. Sarah Ray, another really interesting artist I've had the opportunity to interview in doing all this work. A Russian, Yuri Shishkov, used to work in a root cellar when it was illegal. He could go to jail for building guitars. Came to America, and now he's doing things like this, really quite extraordinary. Gibbons, God bless him, has contributed some original artwork to some of my books. This is what I love, is like finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, like, yeah, Grandpa's got a box up in the attic, you can have it if you know, nobody's looked at it for 50 years, and then I find something that is just incredibly revealing. Quick story, so the mastermind of Fender marketing, Don Randall, who is an absolute marketing guru, he's out in the field in 1948, 1949, and he's got a couple samples of this newfangled thing, a solid body electric guitar, and he's selling it. Leo Fender is back in California in the shop, tweaking, refining. I finished the guitars already. We're out here selling them. Leo says, I'll send them to you when I'm good and ready. So I'd heard of the existence of this letter, and my hands were actually shaking when I finally tracked it down. So this is Don writing back to the distributor. The idea in our guitar has made a hit, and believe me, we better get on the ball. He knew all the others would copy them. Every day is precious. I just can't emphasize the importance of this enough. It's far bigger than any other item we produce, much bigger. It's also an entree into places we would never otherwise would get in. If Leo misses the boat now, I will never forgive him. This is in Leo Fender's own hand. He's costing out the price of every single detail in a Telecaster to the 10,000th of a dollar for decimal places. Very revealing about how this guy thought. So my books have, you know, I love finding journals that are revealing, diaries, that sort of thing. This device called a Floyd Rose tailpiece made heavy metal possible as it came to be heard in the 80s. All that stuff, sort of, you know, spandex, poodle hair, all that stuff. And I found a note written on lined yellow legal tablet paper. It's from Floyd Rose. He drew a picture of this. He's just some kid in California, pitched it to Fender. They famously and catastrophically rejected it. The introduction in 1950 of the high quality and crucially affordable Telecaster would have been remarkable in any case. But its injection into the broader mix of post-war technological advances, urban migrations, cultural cross-pollination, and surging sociological realignments multiplied the revolutionary potential of the Telecaster, the even more versatile Stratocaster, and their competitors from Gretsch, Electro, and others. The expansion of radio, television, photo-based magazines, pop music record labels provided not only new forms of entertainment, but also methods by which influences of fashion and musical styles could leap across once formidable barriers of geography, race, and class. Migrating Mississippi sharecroppers brought their rural music to Detroit and Chicago. Stetson-hatted cowboys in Corpus Christi listened to Kansas City jazz on their new Bakelite-bodied radios. City-bred Manhattan songwriters listened to Delta blues. Elvis Presley listened to everyone from Big Boy Crudup to Dean Martin. White kids saw wondrous sights on their black and white televisions they never would have seen in their neighborhoods. Screamin' Jay Hawkins and Bo Diddley on American Bandstand. Howlin' Wolf on Shindig. timing and coincidence would continue to be Leo Fender's allies. His Stratocaster was advertised in the spring of 1954, but not produced in significant numbers until October. By then, Elvis Presley had walked into Sam Phillips' Sun record studio in Memphis, recorded That's All Right Mama, and lit the fuse on the rock and roll powder keg. I might say this, but George Fullerton, I'll see how much time we have, the first employee at Fender helped Leo design, we'll read this, the Telecaster. His son, who's third generation Fullerton to work at Fender, I interviewed him, also interviewed George a number of times. He's basically explaining, to understand Fender, you have to understand the world these people came from, World War II and the Great Depression. You have to understand technology and transportation, and that everything was changing. This was the world that formed them, the mindset of the country. George went from a horse and buggy kind of world to people on the move. Transportation was almost non-existent when these guys were kids. It was difficult to get anywhere, so radio was life-changing. It connected them to the outside world, to other people, different ways of thinking, different sounds. It affected them tremendously. Radio changed the fabric of their society. They'd lived through the Great Depression, and austerity formed them. They developed a great adaptability to move ahead, even with the most severe limitations you can imagine. It fostered improvisation and resourcefulness. Today, most of us might go, well, I don't have a belt sander, so this can't be done. They just didn't think that way. The thinking was, just get it done. They lacked many things, yet didn't impose limits on themselves. Being a child of the Great Depression, George came from a world that honed his ability to overcome hardships, to work with what you have, to understand limitations but not be restricted by them. This is what we have to work with? Okay, let's get to work and see what we can do with that. It's not going to hold us back. This kind of adaptability was woven into the people of that generation. In the early days of Fender, George worked in a building with no dust collector, no heat, no bathroom, but it was no big deal to him. He'd suffered his whole life in a difficult environment of carpentry and farming, so working at Fender was fine. So I used to look at pictures like this. Oh, man. I just couldn't believe that, like, items, physical, supposedly inanimate objects that look like this, if you had enough money, you could bring one home and hold it next to your body and strum the keyboard. Gibson was so influential, and then its rival Fender, a very different aesthetic, as Keith Richards called it, the hardware store, the Telecaster, the Stratocaster, the electric bass, which alone changed everything. As Quincy Jones said, there is popular music up until the invention of the electric bass, the Fender bass, and there's pop music after the Fender bass. So I used to stare at these pictures like this, very different aesthetics. And I once wrote, Gibson brochures pictured guys who looked like your dad, wearing suits and wingtips and playing elegant jazz guitars. Fender brochures pictured guys who looked like you, hanging out at the beach with girls in bathing suits, playing rocket ship guitars. Take your pick. When I was in high school, I had a crush on this girl right here. I found her. Of course, she has grown children now. Her dad, Bob Perrine, was the photographer. She and her sister, they were students at Laguna Beach High School. So their father, Bob Perrine, said, hey kids, time for a photo shoot. They'd call up their buddies from Laguna Beach High School, walk across the grass, down the steps, into the sand. They lived on the beach. That's Bob's Thunderbird 57 T-Bird. And in the early 60s, Fender Literature surged with vitality, youth, and splashy colors. A couple of the brochures from 60 and 61, this is Jorley Perrine at 16. This is her, I'm guessing she's 11 when I first wrote this, but then I tracked her down and she was 12. A couple of brochures from 60 and 61 feature different cover photos of four people posing with their Fender gear. They seem to embody the ideal nuclear family celebrated across white American culture and commerce. 2 of the 4 are female, which in itself sets these brochures apart from virtually the entire body of professional level guitar literature up to that point. With occasional exceptions, women were portrayed in other high-end catalogs as props, if at all. On these Fender covers, however, the most prominent person is a girl who looks about 11 years old. This bold departure revealed another aspect of the new message. Fender amps and guitars are for serious professionals, sure, but they're also for anyone excited about making music with stringed instruments. Families, amateurs, even youngsters. So I talk a lot about her father, the photographer, who lived in an art collection. He had one of the world's greatest collections of African art, and his house was an art gallery, and he built the house around the gallery. Photography was just a sideline for him. Bob enlisted his 3 daughters, who recruited their fellow students from Laguna Beach High School. He posed to teenagers in board shorts and bikinis on nearby beaches, put guitars in their hands, used surfboards, his own 57 convertible as props. These images helped inject Fender squarely into the mythos of Southern California as America's Shangri-La, an earthly paradise evoked by surf music, beach movies, palm tree postcards, and sports car culture. So here's Bob and his family. He taught these girls how to sing. They're all very musical. Just as remarkable as Perrine's oceanside tableau were his studio photos, which reflected his lifelong background in fine arts. In Fender catalogs of the early 60s, guitars were posed like paintings on artist easels or alongside ornate picture frames and sleek designer furniture. Through Perrine's lens, jazz masters and showman amps seemed perfectly at home among beatnik sculptures, paintbrushes, tubes of oil paint, and semi-abstract portraits reminiscent of Leroy Neiman. Suspending some of the guitars in midair added a dreamy, gravity-defying element to the art gallery ambiance. Compared to the stuffy bow tie and brown wingtip vibe of other companies' brochures, the image of a blonde piggyback tilted skyward on skinny chrome legs looked like a Salvador Dali. This chapter talks about Fender in the 50s, fully immersed in Southern California culture and manufacture. Aviation was centered in California. It was evolving into aerospace. Guys in their garages were hot rodding their jalopies. That evolved into sports car culture, drag racing, NASCAR, all that stuff. What was happening in architecture, what was happening in painting, West Coast School, Hollywood, up the road, all of these things were, Fender was very much a part of all that. So this is Bob's guitar in his studio, one of his paintings. His paintings are collected in more than 200 galleries, museums, collections worldwide. I found her, that's Edie Carhart. She was the real deal, probably the foremost women's surfer, certainly of her age group in all of California. We had wonderful interviews. I wanted to know what it was like to be a part on that side of the lens of this marketing and creating, as I call it, this mythos of Southern California as America's Shangri-La. She was also a mermaid at Disneyland, you know, in class, and we had great conversations. So this is Bob. This is one of my chapters on all this stuff. And imagery like this. Like, this is a mediocre record, but my goodness, look at that photo. I mean, you got these blonde guys with blonde coats and blonde hair and blonde guitars and blonde amps. But I think that like all the necks of the guitars are adjusted just perfectly, and someday I'm gonna have a Stratocaster who looks just like that guy's imagery. Neil Boyle, well, you can just tell. I mean, he perfectly captured in his paintings this kind of 60s sort of rat package, West Coast cool. There's a lot of album covers like the Jackie Gleason orchestra record up there. And Don Randall, the marketing guru, brought him in to illustrate Fender catalogs. Here are a couple more of his album covers. We saw tons of this stuff. This caption reads, you can almost hear the music, feel the energy. Neil Boyle's illustrations conjured a dash and verve no other company's image could match. I think when you play an instrument, you have a connection with everybody else who plays that instrument, particularly if it's as quirky as like a Fender Stratocaster. I once wrote, what more do we need to say about the versatility of an instrument that was adopted by the guitar players with both Lawrence Welk and Pink Floyd? And so I get artists talking about each other. And these are some of the most revealing things I've found. So here's a spread on Eric Clapton, but it's B.B. King talking about Eric Clapton, and Carlos Santana and Mike Bloomfield and others. Elsewhere I might have Eric talking about Jeff Beck, for example. And rivals. Really interesting to me to talk to a person's rivals to get new perspectives on that person. This is Les Paul, and this whole discussion is his telling me about his relationship with Leo Fender. Most of these guys I mentioned, they're not friends. I don't want to overstate it. They're acquaintances. Like I've said several times, Eric doesn't call me on my birthday. But Michael Bloomfield was a person that I did get close to. Rolling Stone called him nothing less than the future of the blues. Played on Highway 61 Blues that probably every member of my generation has that record, or we certainly know Like a Rolling Stone, that song. All the guitar players have this record. Some quotes about Michael. And he was with Dylan the day Dylan went electric. He put that all in capital letters. It really did change everything. Bob's guitar was sold. I wrote in 2013, it sold at auction for a record $965,000, which sounds like a lot, but they threw in a strap. I've been very fortunate that I've been interviewed by a number of media outlets. It's a great privilege for me to be able to share my take on music and its impact on popular culture. Paul Reed Smith, like a brother to me, said to me one time, someone once said Leo was in a state of grace when he designed the Stratocaster. I can't argue with that. I'm going to read you. I just want to make sure we have time for me to read some of these interviews. So I'm going to read from B.B. King, and I think that will segue nicely into some excerpts from an interview I did with Michael Bloomfield, whom I was just telling you about. This is B.B. King, my first of quite a few extensive interviews. This is from 1980. I'll read you a couple paragraphs from the intro. Riley B. King is the world's preeminent blues guitarist. There's hardly a rock, pop, or blues player anywhere who doesn't owe him something, although because much of his influence has been indirectly transmitted through rock stars, more than a few may be unaware of that debt. His dedication is as inspiring as his talent, and it's hard to imagine someone working harder at music or anything else. For decades, Riley, better known as BB, has worked a staggering 300 nights a year or more, in part because he feels that he must live up to a long-held title. They call him King of the Blues. Many of the post-Beatles guitar stars were, of course, technically accomplished and innovative, but in most cases, beneath the arrangements and the special effects were guitar licks unmistakably attributable to B.B. King and other American bluesmen who, in the U.S. at least, were then known only to a limited number of blues buffs. Aside from phrases and blues scales, the dynamics of rock guitar as a communicative vehicle also owe much to the originality of B.B. King. He can make Lucille talk in an almost literal sense with screams, sassy put-downs, cute little tickles, or an unabashed plea for love. He can articulate the hopelessness and poverty of a love gone wrong with a poetic subtlety rarely matched by mere words. Mike Bloomfield was awestruck upon hearing Eric Clapton in the mid-'60s. Later describing his impression, he groped for superlatives. He was as good as B.B. King. For Bloomfield, an ardent musicologist, it was the ultimate tribute. So I asked him, when did you first encounter music? First music was in the church. From that time until now, that certain something was instilled into me. I'd been baptized as a Baptist, and I was in the Holiness, the Church of God in Christ, and singing and the music in the churches was something that a small boy, even in his 50s today, will never forget. What did your family think of you playing the blues when you started? Oh, I couldn't play them at home. I was formerly a spiritual singer. They wouldn't go for the blues, not around the house. And he laughs. Not then. It's one thing about the early days of blues. A few of the spiritual people liked blues, but they would play their blues after 12, behind closed doors. When they were in their room, nobody could hear them. But you always had a few devils like myself, and a few others that would listen to anything. 3 O'Clock Blues was your first major R&B hit. How did it change your life? I could go into the important theaters. As far as the black people were concerned, when you were getting into show business, there were 3 places you had to go through: the Howard Theater in Washington, the Royal in Baltimore, and the Apollo in New York. 3 O'Clock Blues enabled me to go into these places, and it opened other areas like one-nighters. I had been making about $85 a week on the radio and everything else I could do, $85 total. And when I recorded that first big hit, I started making $2,500 a week. I didn't get to keep all of it, but that was the guarantee. In the early years, how widespread was racial prejudice in show business? In the early years. You mean right now? Well, I was talking about, well, I do. It still happens. A lot of things are not happening for us as they do for the whites. It's a fact. It's a natural fact. I've been one of the lucky few. A lot of things have happened for me, yes. A lot of things have happened for a lot of blacks, but when you compare it to what's happening for the whites, it's a big difference, a great big difference. It's gotten better. We're getting it. Does racism exist predominantly in one field? And he talks about all the fields. And he explains that some of the black stations won't play his music because it's too raw. They say, your music is kept off of some white stations because you're black and off of some black stations because it's blues. And he just bursts out laughing. He says, yeah, of course. I remember once I went to a black dude, a disc jockey that had a program in the South. He said, you know, every day we have an hour of blues. I said, really? Who do you play? Well, I play you, Bobby Bland, Junior Parker, Albert King. I said, what about Jimmy Reed or John Lee Hooker? He said, oh no, they don't fit my program. That really got me uptight, you know, like this guy is Lord and Master. He knows what everybody wants. I guess by being a Virgo, I'm a little sarcastic sometimes. So I said, well, how long is your station on the air? He said, 12 hours. And I said, you play a whole hour of blues? He said, yeah. And I said, well, look, why be so nice to us? How about playing a record or two during them other 11 hours? He didn't like what I said. I didn't really care, because that's the way I felt, and that's the way I feel today. We all have the blues, red, white, black, brown, yellow, rich, poor. We all have these blues. You can be successful and still have the blues. I've been fortunate. Yeah, now I have more to sing about than I ever did before. I say, you're referring to the world situation? He says, yes. I look around. I read the papers. I see what's happening in this country and all over the world. Here there are money troubles. Food's running low in other places. There's been price fixing, oil problems. I go to the prisons. I see what's happening there. Look at the Watergate. I read about that. Look at what's happening with the people we pay our taxes to. Look at Asia, Cambodia. There was bombing going on for years after the Vietnam War was supposedly over. They weren't bombing trees. They weren't bombing ditches. I think of my people, the ones I left behind in Mississippi, and all the people in all the Mississippis. We are part of each other, you know. Those problems used to affect me individually, directly, and now they affect me indirectly. When one person, it hurts. When one person is hurt, it hurts me too. When I see their condition, I know what they feel, and I feel it. What's your message? Here I am. I'm trying to work. I'm trying to bring people together. I'm trying to get people to see that we are our brother's keeper. So there are many, many things that go along with it. It was reported that you once deliberately chose a spot to perform that's located between black and white neighborhoods of a small Mississippi town so as to draw a racially mixed audience. He says, yeah, I got them all. We never would have had any segregation if people would have had enough music around. If musicians from all around the world could get together country to country, that would be a good thing. Like I toured the Soviet Union. The other people who got together thought about politics, but the American and Russian musicians didn't think about anything except music. It was a tremendous experience. He founded something called FAIR, F-A-I-R-R, with F. Lee Bailey. It's a prison that's helping inmates. We found that about 70-75% of the people in there were black or other minority races, very young, in their teens or 20s. I feel a lot of the judges, the people who arrest these fellows who put them in there, they don't even know what it looks like. I felt if we kept it up long enough, some of these people would probably be invited to go in there and see for themselves, and it might make them think a little bit different. I played Walpole Prison out from Boston. I saw several of my friends who'd been out of sight for quite a few years because they'd been in there. 2 or 3 of them told me it wouldn't be so bad to spend 10 or 15 years someplace if they knew they'd have something to depend on when they got out. You see, inside the walls, they know everything that's going on. Our television and radio and the papers and everything ain't nothing compared to the prison grapevine, man. They know many employers won't hardly hire them. And a lot of inmates realize they're being supported by people's taxes. They don't want anybody to pay. They like to do their own thing. They told me, BB, if we could get guitars, if we could get books, if we could get something to work with. Well, it hurt me so bad thinking about a guy having to stay in a place for 10 or 15 years. Nothing, you know. I would probably be in prison today if it hadn't been for some folks caring about what I was doing. What brought about your recognition on an international scale? It has to do with many, many things, like the changing of the times, like the marching, and like the people getting together and trying to stamp out prejudice, and all the many, many things. It seemed to bring people together. It started to make people think, to see that everybody had something to offer. If you listen carefully, you could learn something from others. People started searching for truth. Well, I've been digging all this time. Black awareness. There was a time if you called me black, it was insulting. Oh, yeah. In Mississippi, we always did call white people. As a whole, we didn't really want to be called black because we felt it was degrading, because it seemed the person calling you black was saying something else, too, was saying something more. We began to feel we did have something to be proud of. Like when James Brown made I'm Black and I'm Proud, that really hit a lot of us. I'm black and I'm proud. And this all has to do with the blues. BB was in a number of accidents, busted up a number of guitars. On the 13th or 14th one, an accident right outside of Shreveport. I remember seeing a bone in my right arm. They took me to the hospital, sewed it up. The doctor said I nearly lost the use of the arm because of some nerve in there. But we drove to Dallas, and I played that night with my left hand. I still made the job. Weren't you also injured in Israel? Yeah, I fell about 9 feet, messed up the side of my face and my shoulder, and busted a blood vessel in my left hand. My teeth went right through my lips, 7 more stitches. And I went swimming that evening in the Dead Sea. I couldn't miss it, man, because we were sold out in Jerusalem, the holy city. I had to make that. You've toured the world and worked 300 nights a year for over 3 decades. What is the source of your strength and energy? You've asked me a very hard question. I guess one thing is that when I became popular and started going to the many, many places, I always felt kind of bad about stopping school in the 10th grade. I wanted to be able to talk to people everywhere I went, to really participate in whatever was around. I moved about. I found out my education was really off. I started learning how much I didn't know. That was one of the reasons why I really started to push myself, and I've done it through the years. Sometimes a lot of people wouldn't expect a blues singer to know certain things, and I do know them. I won't mention them, being a Virgo, but it just knocks me out for people to cut me short. Thinking that, yeah, BB's interest in ours. So people think, okay, the B didn't go to college, or he didn't do that. There's certain things they don't expect me to know, I know about. It's my last question in this interview. Many people call you King of the Blues. Does that change your outlook on your work or make you feel obligated in some way? I never think of myself as King of the Blues. I happen to be a guy named B.B. King, and he plays the blues. Of course, I think I know my job pretty well. What keeps my feet on the ground is there are people who haven't had the opportunity I've had, who were just as talented, even more so, some of them. And I have so many young fans now, white and black, that come up to me. They trust me. They have faith. You know how it is when you do something and it's appreciated by your girlfriend or your father or mother, whoever it may be. You can see it in their eyes. I can't explain it. It's a feeling I can't tell you about. You have to see for yourself. Maybe like your little brother, your daughter, your son. You look at them There's something that tells you, I know it seems a little deep and it's hard to explain, but you know this person is really serious about what you've done. I wish I knew the words. Now I'm really at a loss. You're hurting when you can't say what you really want. There are times no one else can tell you that they dig you like this special person. This feeling has happened to me as a musician over the years when I go out on stage and guys come up and want to play guitar with me. You can look in their eyes, the young musicians. You know you've been something that's going to help them go much further than they probably would have without you. It's like seeing your own children. You don't want to mess up. And this makes you really buckle down and try to do a little better. I look at my own kids sometimes. They won't say it around me, but I can tell they've been whispering, that's my daddy, that's my daddy. That within itself is enough to make me really go out and try to do better. I try and live in a certain way so that each day I meet a person. They can't help but say, well, he's just B.B. King, that's all. B.B.'s disciple, Mike Bloomfield, one of the more interesting people I've known. I'm going to read this from an interview in 1979. I'm going to read the first couple of paragraphs. I'm going to jump into the interview. It begins, Michael Bloomfield's legend won't go away. Though he is passionately committed to discovering, dusting off, and reinterpreting the dozens of musics in virtually every corner of America's post-Civil War folk heritage. His audiences are often aware of that fact. They're more interested in hearing him recreate the sounds of the records that made him one of the world's preeminent blues rock guitar superstars more than a decade ago. Unlike the music of Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, whose blues roots were one step removed and sometimes obscured by the smoke and sparks of acid rock, Bloomfield's blues were unadorned, accessible, assimilable. His guitar technique turned with such soulfulness that he broke a color line of sorts, demonstrating a blues sensibility uncommon among white instrumentalists and earning respect from the sacred heroes of his youth. Without a guitar, he once said, I'm a poet with no hands. He was much more interested in current work than past glories. He played on Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone and on the Highway 61 Revisited LP, both seminal recordings monumentalized by pop historians. And yet in the June 71 GP interview, he referred to the latter as that album Highway 61 or whatever it's called. He is well-read, thoughtful, serious, and yet his eyes still has the gleam, his mouth the grin of a kid who would not only dare to show his young, fat, white face in a South Side club, but would also have the gall to practically force himself into an onstage jam alongside the baddest guitar slinger in town. Muddy Waters, who basically ran the South Side, put the word out that this kid's okay. And he was always taking care of Michael Bloomfield in Chicago. During the 60s, were you stimulated by all the attention? Well, I don't need ego fixes. I'm sort of embarrassed by adulation. As much as anyone else, I enjoy energy transference. Like in its highest form, you see it in the church, where you have a good preacher who goes nuts in the audience, they carry out the women over the heads of the crowd. I'm just not a compulsive junkie. Bob Marley explained to me that he found it demeaning, in a way, to play in front of people. They don't know who you are. You're exhibiting some of your innards in front of strange people. That can lead to idolatry, and idolatry is dangerous. I talk about his fame, but you didn't relate to being a rock star yourself? No, not at all. I couldn't even conceive of myself as a rock star. I had no idea what was happening. I was into researching old forms of music and belonging to folklore societies and meeting old players and going to folk festivals. You didn't see yourself as the American Eric Clapton? No, never. I was going through an intense period of musical self-awareness. I knew what I wanted to do. All of my diverse inputs were sort of coming together and solidifying. It was coming out of the way I wrote prose, painted pictures. The same aesthetic value was brought to everything. A lot of things influenced my confidence in the worth, the value of all this. Everything was coming together for me in an artistic sense. I was developing a set of Bloomfield criteria. I realized I have a way of seeing the world. Everything is filtered through this certain aesthetic mechanism. It was a pure visceral thing. Well, right when I was going through all of this incredibly important self-realization, Barry Goldberg took me to see this manager friend of his. And the guy looked across the table and said, boys, let's put a super group together. What was your response? I told him he was crazy. Al Cooper invented the term supergroup, supersession. It was a pure scam. It was filthy lucre. It had nothing to do with an affinity for playing with each other, just a name, a marketable name, like Fruit Loops. So I said to this manager, can you understand me? Can you grok it? Does it go through your brain what I'm saying to you, what I'm going through, what I'm going to do in terms of art? What did he say? He said, let's put a super group together. All right, they put this group together called KGB. Did the band members get along? Yeah, we got along great. We liked each other, but artistically it was a terrible experience. How was the band marketed? Well, the first thing we had to do was to get a record company. So we went to Hollywood, a showcase for record executives. We were up on the auction block. This is a supergroup, people. This is Rucka Rucka from Humma Humma. All these execs who came to see us looked exactly the same. Pinky ring, leisure suit, shirt open to the tits, fabulous complexions, and blow-dried hair. Also, some real cigar stub guys. Hey, Mike, I've been following your career ever since, what was that group you were with? You were with Bloomfield, weren't you? We got a record deal, though. It was with MCA. We were a product. We were hula hoops. We were skateboard. We got a deal. It went on for weeks. I realized what was happening. I'll skip down. You decided to leave. Yeah, finally, I said, this is the day of the locust. We were Mark Spitz on Bob Hope. When they booked us for a 50-city tour, I said, this is beyond the dregs. I quit. But the record came out. Yeah, it came out with my overdubbed parts on it. MCA is such an incredible merchandiser. The record sold. I swear, they could be selling pig farts, whales copulating. It wouldn't matter. They would sell it successfully. We sold almost 500,000 records, a non-band. All right, so we're talking about his childhood. A lot of the blues and rock sounded alike to you for a time. Yeah, it all had this sort of outlaw quality that I was dying to get into any way I could. There was an outlaw group of kids in the suburbs, greaser sort of hoodlum kids. And I used to look at them and I wanted to be sort of like that, a Presley-esque greasy guy. I couldn't really tell what I wanted to be more, a Presley-esque greasy hillbilly or a jivey blues singer. When did you first encounter the blues? And he talks about listening to the radio. He was in Chicago. Oh my God, this is another world. When I found out these guys all lived right there in my town, all I had to do was take a subway. I could go see them. It just killed me. The clubs were open till 4 in the morning. They'd be there for 7 sets a night. And they were in their prime, a lot of them. How many white people in the audience? 1. Was there a period when you were musically inactive? Yeah, I didn't play guitar at all around 70 or 71. I was really down and out. And I lived in this little dive. The flag, the electric flag, one of the great bands, had broken up. I'd cut Super Session, and I got really into shooting junk. What were the effects of heroin? Heroin gave me pimples. And I put the guitar down. I didn't touch it. See, a junkie's life is totally, chronically fucked. You either eat and move and be productive, or else you're a junkie. There's no choice. At least there wasn't for me. Well, what were you doing besides shooting junk? Well, shooting junk is very full-time. You've got to get out there and get that dope, hustle, sell televisions, whatever. If you're into being passive and non-productive, that's one thing. But I knew that it had hurt me. Shooting junk made everything else unimportant, null and void, nolo contendere. My playing fell apart. What made you decide to quit heroin? It was a very moving experience, I'll tell you about it. Some of the best San Francisco Bay Area guitar players came to see me. Terry Haggard from the Sons of Champion, Carlos Santana, and others. And they said to me, man, you ought to be ashamed of yourself to charge admission at the door to see you, because you're a fucking joke. You're a laughingstock. We used to learn from you. We sat at your feet. When Butterfield came to town, we all came to see you. We loved you. We loved what you did. How can you be who you are? How can you put your name on a marquee and charge money to see this ludicrous exhibition of what Michael Bloomfield used to be? You're a fraud. You can't even hold a guitar anymore. How did you respond? Well, I just said, hey, I'm not into that anymore. I'm into watching The Tonight Show and shooting dope. I'm into stoned leisure. Did they leave? No. They stayed. They wouldn't let up. They sat down and they said, now listen to us play. and they played. Hag started playing, and oh my God, he was better than I ever was. It was unbelievable. From then on, I vowed, never again. If you're gonna get up there in front of people, God knows you better be good. That those guys would do that, to come over, to come down on me so hard, to get the balls to do that, it so moved me that these people wanted to see me playing again. It affected my heart tremendously. What nice guys, what gentlemen. That got me back into guitar. Here's the last question, I'm skipping ahead to the end. Do you see yourself as a musical caretaker of sorts? Well, a lot of these songs are dying. I don't know many people our age, even black people, who play blues or care about blues. Where are the young bluesmen? Freddie King's dead, Magic Sam's dead. I have some black friends who are music teachers and folklorists, and I'm teaching them. Culturally, it's so weird, a Jew teaching a black about blues. I would like to help keep those forms alive so that people will know this is how America played. And I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from an article I wrote on Michael in Rolling Stone. I'll read the first 2 paragraphs and the last 2 paragraphs. Michael Bloomfield leaned over and shoved my left hand 2 frets down the fingerboard. Go back to the flat third, now bend all the way up to the 5th. A 4-fret bend seemed impossible, especially on Bloomfield's bargain basement steel string. See, I start 2 frets higher than that, I explained. I know, he said, but that's not the Albert King way. I tried the bend just as he suggested, drilling it between the eyes with one of Albert's classic screamer licks. It was perfect. For 4 beats, I was Albert King. There you go! Mike's shriek of delight blasted my Sony's VU needle into the red zone, and he bounced up and down in his chair, laughing himself silly and beating his fists against his thighs like a big happy kid. When I heard the news of his death, I remembered the secret of Albert King as revealed to me by Mike Bloomfield. The last time I saw him was at Bob Dylan's November 15th concert at the Warfield in San Francisco. He ambled on stage in bedroom slippers, the world's baggiest ass jeans, and a black leather motorcycle jacket with belts and buckles hanging down. He strapped on his funky Stratocaster for a rousing like a Rolling Stone and came out with both barrels blazing. He was daring, reckless. I thought he'd never played better. And he received the evening's wildest ovations. Driving home, I was elated. I thought about the time Mike insisted I come up and play Carol, Chuck Berry's song, with him and his band at a club he called, quote, a real bucket of blood, famous for its fights. Like I'm not nervous enough playing with these guys. The hippies hate the rednecks, and the rednecks hate the bikers, and they all gather there to kick each other's asses. If you ever write an article about me, you can call it Jamming with the Blue Jew. Buddy Miles was on drums, as Jimi Hendrix's drummer. Buddy Miles was on drums. The crowd was beyond rowdy, and I was sweating like a pig. God damn if a fight didn't break out during my big number. Broken glass, the works. Take another solo, Bloomfield hollered, laughing. Keep on rocking. All the way. So this work has taken me to a lot of interesting places. Beyond writing and editing and media and publishing and so on. I co-designed this guitar with Paul Reed Smith. I contributed the electronics. It was a great experience for me. They made 100 pieces, retailed for $8,000. They sold out in 50 minutes. Paul and I improvised a lecture in Chicago just a few weeks ago. It was supposed to be about one thing, and they sold out the tickets, and Paul says, we're going to do something completely different. So Tom and I are going to improvise a lecture on the history of the electric guitar. He insisted, no notes, no script, no rehearsal, no practice. We winged it. We interviewed each other and told stories. And it was a great experience. I was a consultant to the Experience Music Project. I helped them lay out the floor plan. Just recently, I was the subject of a podcast. I've been interviewed a bunch of times. That was my first podcast. This was a few weeks ago. Some of my work is archived at the National Museum of American History, and I'm currently negotiating with Chapel Hill in their folk life collection to house some of my work as well. I've done a bunch of work with the Smithsonian, I've appeared on television, hosted panels and such. Okay, I gotta tell you one quick story. So this picture, and I tell you the story because there are like hundreds of them, but this is one of my favorites. So this picture appeared in the 1956 Fender catalog, the Mary Kay Trio. We didn't know anything about Mary Kay. We never heard of her except in the Fender catalog. The guitar that she's playing, a white Stratocaster with gold hardware, came to be nicknamed the Mary Kay. She didn't know about this for many years. I thought, well, I'd never seen an interview with Mary Kay, not to be confused with a cosmetics person. I thought, what if she's still out there? What if I could find her? If only somehow I could track down Mary Kay. She had a website. 30 seconds of grueling research. So we had a great conversation. She passed away a couple of years ago. She's Hawaiian. She changed her name for a couple of reasons. A lot of people couldn't pronounce it. But also they would see the Hawaiian name and assume that she played Hawaiian music, and she did. She was a serious jazz guitar player, jammed with Tal Farlow. Elvis used to come see her in Las Vegas. Of course, he couldn't go out in public. He'd sit in the wings. They would smuggle him in through the kitchen, and she'd be flirting with Elvis. Of course, the audience never knew that he was there. Well, and Abigail would borrow Wine's pickups, which are sort of like the microphones that make electric guitars electric, and her pickups are like the best single coil pickups ever. They're highly regarded. They cost a ridiculous amount of money. Well, Abby went to work for Fender in 1956, the same year that this picture appeared. So I called my buddies at the custom shop, and I said, look, I found Mary. She's fantastic. Why don't you clone a 56 Mary Kay? And Abby went to work in 56. There's so few women in our story. Why don't we do something that celebrates Mary and Abby, and you clone, have Abby Wine and pickups for a Mary Kay? And they did. So that's it. I got a chance to deliver the keynote address for this gentleman who I mentioned several times, Don Randall. And thank you, Torsten and Maria. This is Don Randall's jacket that I'm wearing. And so my Fender buddies, they're just unbelievably jealous that I own this picture. I've contributed to a number of other books, about a dozen or so, done a bunch of projects for the Jimi Hendrix estate. These are some of them. I first was published in Crawdaddy. The editor said, I can't pay you much money, but I'll put you on a masthead between Paul Krasser and William Burroughs. I said, okay. These are some of the issues of Rolling Stone I contributed to. I went to work at Guitar Player. I was there for 14 years, the last 10 as editor-in-chief. And I started bass player. So I inherited Guitar Player, but founded bass player. It was a great experience for me. I have time to read some excerpts from a Keith Richards very amusing and wonderful interview for me. And I want to close with some excerpts from my interview with my childhood hero, Chuck Berry. I'm going to read much of the intro. This is like a 10, 11,000 word piece. It's big, so little excerpts. Watching Keith Richards strap on his Telecaster is like watching Thor pick up his hammer. He ambles on stage into a maelstrom of applause, oddly resplendent in his gauzy scarf and kick-your-ass boots, a mix of just fell out of bed dishevelment and continental flair, a Marlboro poked into his pirate's grin, red slits for eyes, hungry for action. He exhales a cloud of smoke, savages the opening chords of Start Me Up, and the sold-out stadium threatens to come apart. The hammer has struck with an electrifying clang. The Rolling Stones are back to work. Last year, a quarter century, this is from 1989, last year, a quarter century after he and his boyhood pals put together what came to be called the world's greatest rock and roll band. And long after his own ascent to rhythm guitar's Mount Olympus, Keith Richards found himself without a group. So this is a reunion of the Rolling Stones. This year, the Stones have reunited to face competition not only from a new generation of rockers, but also from fellow veterans of the rock and roll wars of decades gone by. Some of the latter have aged well, while others have been exhumed, resuscitated with electroshock and chest thumping, and then wheeled out into the spotlight to give it yet another go, as classic rock formats crowd the airwaves. Critics and fans alike assailed a season of wheezing geezers, a celebration of glories past. How have the Stones, relics by pop music standards, avoided the dinosaur syndrome? With two simple aspirations, record of the year and tour of the year. They have a bunch of stats about how unbelievably successful they are. But while the album, the new album, which is Steel Wheels, surges with familiar currents, the lads croaking off the background vocals like boozy pub rowdies, the just a shot away recklessness, the multi-guitar firestorms, it manages to recall classic Stones records without merely rehashing them. Plus, it holds a few surprises, such as Keith's achingly soulful nylon string guitar solo on Almost Here You Saw It. On the first listen, Steel Wheels sounds like a very good album. As the spike of repetition grooves the brain, it begins to sound like a great one. Some records are contrived through a laborious process in which instruments are isolated and recorded on the individual tracks, often at different times, then mixed and matched to create a facsimile of a real band playing in real time. Rough edges can be smoothed over, with each track hermetically sealed, and the whole production embalmed in a high-tech gloss. No muss, no fuss. The Rolling Stones don't do this. Their approach to recording, plug in, let her rip, and see what happens, instead of gleaming with high-definition parts. Their records are blurred by ambiguity at every stage. Overlapping vocals, indistinct divisions of labor on guitars, hybrid rhythms bumping and grinding up against each other, and various wisps of sonic debris swirling around in an echoey murk. These vast, impressionistic soundscapes are darkened with shadows and holes, and in those gaps between funky flat notes and accurate pitches, in the spaces between the beats, shrouded mysteries lurk and rumble, keeping the records ultimately impenetrable. Steel Wheels is a prime example. They skip ahead. The Stones have once again managed to use the high-tech equipment to produce an album that has all the high-tech gloss of a rusty switchblade. Of course, the magic of the Stones runs deeper than their patented apocalyptic garage production techniques. Although the music is in some ways complex and has been analyzed to smithereens, its vitality derives from raw elements. A rhythm section that pumps and pulses like the heart of a great beast. A millionaire jet-setter frontman who still sings like a street punk. The able musicianship of Ron Wood and a guitar sound like nothing else on earth. To a significant degree, the art of Rolling Stones records is an extension of the guitar sensibility of Keith Richards, who sketches motifs with bold, blotchy guitar strokes, then extends the boundaries with strategically placed guitar tracks from foreground to horizon. If one were to diagram the blast pattern of a typical Rolling Stones record, ground level 0 would be the precise point where Keith Richards' hands strike the strings. Although the sound permeates Stones music in general, it is particularly crucial to their classic intros, where the air is electrostatically charged with anticipation. It's all about to happen. On record, these storm is threatening moments identify a typical Stones song in 3 or 4 seconds. On stage, they make "Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones" the most exciting 6 words in rock and roll. Those 6 words are sending fans to their feet all across America. And I described this unbelievably. I said they're putting on the only kind of tour they know how to put on, which is Titanic. I talk about this gigantic stage set. It's so big that even some football stadiums can't accommodate it. It's so tall that they have to put on flashing red lights to keep airplanes away. The bandmates are clearly enjoying themselves. Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman still churn out the pumpinest rhythms since Jerry Lee Lewis's left hand. Mick Jagger, the hardest working man in show business while James Brown's in jail, remains an aerobic phenomenon. Keith Richards continues to squeeze more mileage out of a 1-4 change than anything since Buddy Holly's solo in Peggy Sue. And Ron Wood plays with a vigor reflective of his still youthful energy. If anything, the Stones are tougher and leaner than in 81, 82 when they last ravaged American arenas. Yes, the world is celebrating a long love affair with rock's most notorious band. But the Stones' current successes are so overwhelming they keep the band from being swallowed whole by its past. One block of 300,000 concert tickets sold out at the computer melting rate of 50,000 per hour. And the tour, expected to rake in something like $18 million per band member in gate receipts alone, was hailed in the Cincinnati Post as the single best rock and roll show this reviewer has seen in more than 20 years. Satisfaction, indeed. Keith Richards' face is the face of a rock guitar lifer, weathered and creased by a fabled Tease the Reaper lifestyle of scarcely imaginable excess. And yet, more than 2 decades after the Stones' first U.S. single, Not Fade Away, his eyes still gleam with the spark of a teenage guitar wise guy. It is the sweetest of ironies, elected by acclamation the band least likely to survive the 70s. The Rolling Stones enter the 90s in fighting trim at the top of the heap, the competition nowhere in sight. Keith Richards gets the last cackle. Time is on his side, after all. I'll read you a couple of exchanges here. He talks about, I asked him if one of these questions you ask when you know the answer, were you influenced by drummers? He said, look, you have to understand, all of our concerts in the early days were riots. You couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear Mick. Couldn't hear the bass. I would stand next to the drums and I would watch the drum go like this. And so Charlie and I, that's why the Stones sound the way they sound. He could hear, I would put my amp next to him and I would watch him and I could hear him play drums. Was there a time when you thought you'd have to get away from the Chuck Berry style if you're going to have your own voice? And he talks about that. I hadn't really progressed much as a player with all the years of not hearing myself on stage. I mean, there were long periods where we never got past the third song in a set. We never actually played. We went to a gig and a riot started and the kids hit the stage and the only big deal was how the hell are we getting out? Around the third song, it was just all over, just madness. It was living a hard day's night. Climbing over the rooftops with chief constables who didn't know their way. Oh, be careful, don't fall. Getaways down fire escapes, through laundry chutes, into bakery vans. It was all mad. We ended up being like the monkeys without even realizing it. So we talked about his earliest gigs. When did you realize this might actually be your life's work? Gosh, that's hard. In a way, when we started the band, there was not much prospect of even making the band patrons. It might have lasted 6 days. We never knew from one week to another. If we couldn't have come up with the rent for the joint once in a while, we would have been forced to dissipate or sell off the equipment. It might have been the end of the band. After a few gigs and a year in the clubs, you suddenly get to make a record. And even if you manage to get a hit, the average lifetime of anybody, except for Elvis, was 2 years. Here's my last question. When do you realize this could go on? This is what I am. I guess by around satisfaction time. Yeah, we started to realize you could develop this thing. And if you did it right, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do it as long as you want. But you don't think about those things at the time. There was no way of foreseeing it going up until now or foreseeing all of this, the current tour. It's actually reached a point where probably a good 80% of the people there at the concerts don't even know a world without the Rolling Stones. And so you become a fixture, like the moon. I just want to make sure I have time. I'm going to read a couple of these things out of order because, excuse me, I have a cold. But after reading about B.B. King making all those gigs with stitches and broken limbs and stuff, I thought, well, I got to do it. And this is great fun for me, by the way. I'm really glad you're here. I'm going to read a few excerpts from the Chuck Berry interview And then I'm going to read a few excerpts, and I'm going to close with some comments from my intro. There's some surprising stuff in here. Mystery surrounds the roots of your style. When developing it, did you first hear melody and then locate it on the fingerboard, or did you think visually, moving through patterns? I didn't know anything about style when I started. I mean, I knew what a style was, but I wasn't aware of having a style myself. That sort of thinking was far too technical for me. But putting a song together, now that did come in anticipation of a melody that I heard in my head. But you say my style. See, I still do not recognize any style of my own. Generations of musicians would be dumbfounded to hear you say that. So he talks about, I tell him I'm aware of the people who came before him, and I don't really hear him in any of those predecessors. I don't know where your style comes from. And he laughs at horn players, saxophone. He's telling me about this guy, Illinois Jacquet. I don't know anything about jazz saxophone. I knew the name. I said, his guitar player? No, Illinois himself, tenor sax player, his choice of notes, his melodies. You hear it in my music if you know how to listen. Charlie Christian too, solo flight, it's so great, man, it's a son of a bitch. I got the first 16 bars down, it took me 30 years. Your fans might be surprised to learn that your early goal was to play big band music, backed up by horn sections. But that's what I wanted, I really did. I wanted to count chords behind a big band and play swing tunes. If money and opportunities had been the same in blues or big band, would you have played a different style of music all these years? Come on, man, don't make me answer that. Maybe if the money was good, I'd have had a few hairdressing salons, big chain of them. So I point out to him that, so everybody plays Chuck Berry. I mean, every frat party band. And we're actually passing a guitar back and forth. And I'm explaining, I realize, it's not all da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. And I hum this little melody for him. And he slams the table and he says, Carl Hogan, right there, that very figure. And then he hums the head to Charlie Christian solo flight. That's it, man, you're right. You've got to move around a bit to play that. And the Illinois Jacquet things too. Do you see two distinct sides to your music, the rock and the blues? Well, things like Johnny B. Good and Carol, those are for the mass market. Wee Wee Hours, that was for the neighborhood. But this isn't a black-white thing. That irks me. There's no such thing as black and white in music. Roy Orbison had an impression of you as a black country singer. Was country music an influence? I thought he was going to say, not really. Oh, yes. I did it every night back in St. Louis before we recorded. It was called country or hillbilly or honky tonk. I was doing Mountain Dew, jambalaya. How'd your hillbilly music go over? That's a good question, a very important answer. There's a great span in music and variety I cherish. When you go to hear jazz, often that's all you hear. But we would do Deo, the Banana Boat song by Harry Belafonte, and Jamaica Farewell, and then jump back with some Muddy, then some Sweet Nat King Cole. No spirituals, though. I always say when you sin, go ahead and sin. When you ask forgiveness, keep it separate. After hearing Maybelline, Leonard Chess expressed surprise that country music could be written and sung by a black man. Did it seem like a country song to you? Definitely. When I was growing up, the country people played fiddles and all that. But then there were these pianos and saxophones. I liked it all, very much into it. Is it possible to draw a line between 50s country and early rock and roll? Or between 50s boogie and early rock and roll? No, you can't draw any lines like that. You can't draw a line between science and religion, man. Even the edge of a razor blade is round. If you get up close to it, it's like a shadow on the wall. No sharp edges. We have a long conversation about Muddy Waters. Chuck says, mercy, mercy, baby, now that's blues. And you know what? I wish there was just some way I could bring Muddy's blues to the white populace. I mean, not even all the black people know. Like I said, it's not a black and white thing. I've seen some of the white brothers. Yes, sir. Tonight we're going to play some Muddy. And they've got heart. Lord, they're close to him. They're right on his ass. And I look up and I know Muddy looks down. And he just loves him so much. I asked him where this comes from. And he stood up, Harry James, man, 1 o'clock jump. Listen to the trumpets. I keep telling them it's big band, but they want to call it rock and roll. You've written rock and roll songs about cars and teenagers, and you've written blues. Which songs mean the most to you? Which style? How can you love one child more than another? Do you remember your first big white audience? Paramount, Brooklyn. After Maybelline in '55. Damn Near Totally White. Tony Bennett on top of the bill. What were your feelings upon going out on that stage? Just that it wouldn't happen again. That was only our 5th engagement. We really thought the whole rock and roll thing would last for just a few months. Okay, I want to close with a couple paragraphs of from a This is 1988. Chuck Berry came motorboating over the hill in the summer of '55, his Gibson ES350T blaring and clanging like Maybelline's Roadhog Coupe de Ville. It was one of the most compelling and enduring images in pop culture, the loose-jointed, duck-walking hipster with the low-slung guitar, the happening threads, the wicked gleam in his eye. Exploring his guitar playing requires a glance at his broader artistry, since both involve a mixing of musical styles. Chuck Berry was there when it all happened, or rather, he helped make it happen. Discussions of the birth of rock and roll always entail terms such as amalgamation and hybrid. Elvis Presley is invariably and rightly cited as the white man who broke character, the hillbilly who was steeped in gospel and country and yet loved black music, sounded like a black man, at least to some, and sang the blues, or at least a new kind of blues. Chuck Berry was the flip side of the Presley coin, the black man who broke character, who was steeped in blues and swing, yet loved country music, loved Western, routinely performed jambalaya before he was famous, and sounded like a white man to many who first heard his records. Indeed, his debut album's liner notes characterized his style as rockabilly, a term otherwise applied almost exclusively to Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, and other white men. Presley and Berry, two giants, one white, one black, standing shoulder to shoulder, both rooted in their respective traditions and yet each with one foot firmly planted in the other's territory. While this tidy analogy is far too simplistic to explain rock's deep and tangled roots, it suggests Berry's profound impact as a crosser of lines, a breaker of barriers. Still, the analogy is incomplete. The point is not that Elvis, Chuck, and others played white or black music, but rather that together they forged a new sound that helped obliterate such distinctions altogether. Disc jockey Alan Freed called it rock and roll, and the name stuck. Early rock's foremost singer-songwriter, Chuck wrote classic 2.5-minute novellas of churning hormones and rock fever. In Berry's America, street-savvy hepcats tooled around in cherry-red jitneys and coffee-colored Cadillacs, chasing after sweet little rock and rollers such as Nadine, who moved around like a wayward summer breeze, or little Queenie, looking like a model on the cover of a magazine. A percussionist of sorts who used syllables instead of drumsticks. He fashioned his lyrics into a sly, jivey poetry that percolated with its own gimme five lingo, motivating, coolerator, botheration, and pulsed with irresistible rhythms. As I got on the city bus and found a vacancy, thought I saw and even if his writing, singing, and stylistic alchemy had not already secured him a place on rock's Mount Rushmore, Chuck Berry would be celebrated today for his guitar playing alone. His style was innovative in both sound and technique, and its ring-a-bell tone, jolting syncopations, slippery bends, and a whole new vocabulary of double stops simply changed the way the instrument is played. He reeled off his intros and fills the same sassy way he strutted the stage, the same way he rapped his finger-popping teen sagas, the look, the deft wordplay, the hip-shot Gibson, all were integrated into some sort of transcendent, brown-eyed, handsome man persona, as if a guitar lick could swivel its hips, as if a song lyric could have a pencil-thin mustache. Never has a guitar style had more attitude. Here's the end of the intro. If you don't already know what makes him such a towering instrumentalist, go to the source. Of the countless people who have performed Chuck's style, no one's surpassed the finesse of the chess classics. Not George Harrison, not Keith Richards, not even Chuck Berry himself. At 61, Chuck Berry is a formidable presence, his lean body still moving with the grace of an athlete, his eyes still twinkling with the mischief of a rakish Hollywood leading man. He is at once a tough hombre and a gracious gentleman, obsessively private one moment, expansive and personable the next. Traveling alone and using pickup musicians who are often under-rehearsed, he is self-contained, singer, songwriter, guitar player, legend. While his 70 to 100 concerts a year range from indifferent to inspired, the audiences are invariably jubilant, dancing in the aisles, hollering till they're hoarse, and paying tribute to rock music's spirit of St. Louis. It all recalls a verse from Sweet Little Rock and Roller. 10,000 eyes were watching him leave the floor. 5,000 tongues were screaming more and more. About 1,500 waiting outside the door. A few years ago, U.S. satellite Voyager 1 was blasted into deep space, past Jupiter and Saturn and on towards Neptune, 4 billion miles from St. Louis, Missouri. On board are recorded greetings to anyone who might encounter it. Among the messages representing planet Earth is a recording of Johnny B. Good, lending due meaning to the refrain, "Long live rock and roll." Maybe someday, countless millennia from now, across the universe, some unimaginable alien thing will be snapping its fingers, or whatever, and grooving on the ancient tale of the little country boy. Like childhoods. Of the little country boy who never ever learned to read or write so well that he could play his guitar just like Ring and Phil. Thank you for coming. I know this runs longer than most of them do, but I will stick out and tell stories as long as anybody. I really appreciate it. It means everything.
Thank you.
Sure. Any questions? Yeah, absolutely.
Any questions?
I think we're afraid.
You think what?
We're afraid.
Why?
To ask questions, because this is it's absolutely stunningly beautiful.
Oh, I got more.
I
No, I
It's just
no.
amazing.
Any questions? I mean, this is all, of course, I mean, tip of the iceberg of a long career. I say, hand, yes, sir.
So you talked earlier, at one point you said something about communicating beyond words. Or
Yeah.
something like that. So talk to us about being a musician and expressing yourself that way, and being a writer and expressing yourself that way. Like, are they different sides of your brain? Do you channel someone else?
Well,
Like, what do you do?
I mean, what a great question. What I think is similar, where I think the overlap is as writers, I always tell my students, we're always asking, who are these people? Who are the readers? What do they bring to the table? And that helps us communicate in an effective way. The thing about music is that sometimes that's the case, and you might play a little differently for one audience than another. But the thing about music, it seems to me, is that, I mean, it's the greatest of the written word, the poetry, the Shakespeare, that transcends the centuries and generations. Music is almost immediately communicative. And I'm not really answering your question, but there's a guy, Thomas Matfumo, the Lion of Zimbabwe, as he's called, and a bunch of his musicians came to see the Deb Cleveland Band one night. And I know these guys don't speak English, but one of them came up to me, and I thought, oh, man, I don't know what these Africans are going to think of this, white boy playing, I don't know. But one of them came up to me with a big grin, and he pointed at my guitar. I'm sure that this might be the only English he knows, but he pointed at my guitar and he said, "B.B. King." And that kind of connection, I've never been able to make it any other way. So I mean, so I guess there is some difference there. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. What other questions do you have? Sir.
I'm curious. I mean, there's a kind of a theme through all these musicians, all these guitar players,
Yeah.
of stuff they've been working on for decades. You know, that trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Do you, as a musician, do you have something that's just plagued you for a long time? Plagued is maybe not the right word, but just something that's just hung with you that you're kind of trying to sort out or sorted out a while ago?
Yeah, here's a weird thing. I enjoy my own work, and sometimes I'll be listening to recordings of the Deb Cleveland Band. I'll go, "That guy's good." I mean, if I'm going to be completely honest, and I'm playing things that if you asked me to duplicate that, I would have to go find it. I don't know how to play it, and it's not because it's so amazing. I mean, I know the limitations of my playing. I mean, my playing is clearly very limited. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, I could explain in musical terms. I really want to get into diminished scales because I hear Bibi doing it, and I hear a lot of great guitar players doing it. I want to play like your friend in your new band, a guitar player I've just discovered. So yeah, in musical terms, I would like to be modal. Any musicians in the room? Like you play anything? Okay, here's like the best guitar lesson I ever got in my whole life. I didn't take any guitar lessons until I was about 55, but Bill Harkleroad, he said, "You know how to play a D major scale?" And I said, "Well, I can find it. I know how to go do, re, mi. I never learned that stuff because it sounded boring when you just play the scale." He said, "Okay, I'm going to play a rhythm in D, and you play, you improvise a solo, but only the notes in a D major scale." Okay, so he's playing a rhythm in D, and I'm playing along, and I'm sounding pretty darn boring. Then he starts playing E minor. He says, "Keep playing the D major scale." He goes to E minor, and I am now Carlos Santana. And it was one of these, so now I use it all the time. So I know there are things like that out there that are relatively low investment, high yield, as they say in financial circles. Yeah, so I'm trying to get better all the time. The best thing for me ever has been playing in the Deb Cleveland Band. Because Marty, who's sort of an ineffective music director, he'll say, "Okay, here's a song in B flat." I'm going, "Oh, come on, man, I'm a guitar, you know, it's like, we're the E's, you know, you guys are the B flats." So he'll play me something, he'll say, "Hey, how about if we double this?" And I'm going, "Sure." And I'm going, "Oh, man." So I don't even know if these guys know this, but I would take this stuff home. Like when I was auditioning for this band, I go, sure. I'd take it home in hours, note for, you know, I don't read music. And so, and my knowledge of theory is, so I would learn the stuff note for note. And then but now it's the most fun stuff we play. It's the stuff that was hardest for me to learn, like duplicating saxophone lines in B flat or E flat or A flat. It's absolutely the most fun thing I do. So a lot of this has been hanging on by my fingernails, and I've been blessed to play in bands, not all of them, but some of them where I'm the least accomplished musician. And so working with players who were several steps ahead of me has helped. But yeah, I got a long way to go. Questions? I'd love to hear them. Sir, hi Ed.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, good.
So what a pleasure and a treat.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just wondering, as the newer music that we're hearing on the radio is less real musicianship, and I'm wondering if you think we're going to lose that in terms of just everything being electronically sampled.
To me, it's a great question. It's part of a larger question about what are the effects on our sociology of the digital age.
And the kinesthetic was.
Yeah, I mean, I used to worry that I would sound like an old curmudgeon when I talk this way, except my students bring up the same issues. You know, we do this all day. Are we losing the ability to have like one-on-one conversations? There's social, there are relationships, you know, that they have with each other. They're all affected by this. And so I love home recording and all this technology. I think it's great that you can make a record at home with all the parts on it. I think that's great. For me personally, there's nothing like getting out in the garage with the gang and just hammering out the tunes and making mistakes and crashing up against each other and having that communication. So I feel sort of the way about it that I feel about distance learning. If I can do a MOOC and reach people that I otherwise couldn't reach, I'm all in favor of it. If I can do stuff with electronics that I otherwise couldn't do, okay. But I'd rather be in a room all breathing the same air and having that one-on-one. I think a lot of musicians, including young ones, feel the same way. You know, they start crashing around with other musicians, and maybe you know, rappers get together with heavy metal players, and you know, all this sort of cross pollination. And yeah, I think the younger generation really appreciates that. Yeah.
Just very quickly, this is
Sure.
not even a question per
Yeah.
se, but so I moved here 2.5 years ago, and one of the first things that struck me about Oregon is how understated things are here. So, case in point, someone said, I think within the first month that I moved here, you should go to Cradle Lake or something. Like, all right, let me check this Cradle Lake thing out. Holy shit, this is amazing. What is this? Yeah. They said the same thing with Blue Pool, and I go there and I'm like, wow, I don't know what it takes to impress these Oregonians. And then I think it was in December or October, I get this email from Tom that says, you know, that Cleveland band were playing, and they're playing blues, and you should come check this out. And I go, okay, I'll go check this out. I'm like, holy shit, this is really, really good. Like, who says come check us out? So I just wanted to say, on top of being a great presenter, you're also a pretty excellent
Thank you.
musician.
Thank you, George.
It was a privilege to hear you guys.
Oh man,
play, so
you made my day.
thoroughly
Thank you.
enjoyed that.
Much appreciated.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
I think that you're the most amazing writer I think I have encountered in such a long time. Like, I'm not a great writer, but your writing is rock and roll. You've got a fact line and a quote line going, and you've got heart at the base. And you just managed to weave that together so beautifully.
I'm
Amazing.
stunned. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Well, coming from someone I admire so much, that means everything.
This was wonderful. Thank you.
Danella.
So I've been trying to figure out how to put this question together. So I came up in the 70s where when you would listen to AM radio, and we lived where we could hear the New York stations. So you would hear Johnny Cash and Helen Reddy and Sly and the Family Stone all in the same
Right.
10 minutes.
Right,
There
right.
wasn't that division.
Right.
And radio, just as you were saying in the 50s, was such a gateway
Yeah.
to so many things.
Yeah.
Do you think that radio still has a role in music anymore?
It's hard for me to answer that because I don't listen to radio much. I like KRVM, where there's a program director somewhere who has taste. I love hearing the kids who are the DJs. So yeah, that was a song by Jackson Brownie. You know, hey, they weren't even born when Jackson Brown had his last hit. Yeah, and my favorite was I heard Voodoo Child and said, yeah, that was Jimi Hendrix playing Voodoo Chili. So most of my new music I get from my sons. They tell me where the good stuff is. And they're the ones who introduced me to rap, for example, who said it isn't all, you know, bitches and hoes and playing and all that stuff. And so it was from my kids that I learned about, you know, Tupac. And for me, a lot of that music is like the folk music was of the 60s. They're singing about real life in the neighborhood, about social injustice and so on. So I tend to get it from other sources. But you're right, when I was, you know, 9, 10, you'd hear Johnny Cash. When I was in high school, you'd hear Jimi Hendrix and Frank Sinatra and Barbra Streisand and the Yardbirds. Back to back, you know. No, I think advertising, everything is so nicheified and so narrowly targeted. You know, it's like so-called classic rock. If I never hear Stairway to Heaven again as long as I live, which is a great song, but what about the other 50 great Led Zeppelin songs that you never play? it's all focus group to death, you know? And so, yeah, so I'm afraid I look elsewhere. If there are great radio stations out there, I do want to know about it, and I will listen to it.
That sounds like what you're saying is that radio used to lead the charge by introducing music to us, and now it follows
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, you'd have a guy in Lubbock, Texas. I mean, there's a great scene that's based on a true story where they're literally breaking down the door because he's going to play Buddy Holly 24/7. And his program directors and the station owners, or, you know, if you're in Macon, Georgia, and you've got this local crazy guy, Little Richard, like he's the greatest singer you've ever heard in your whole life, and all you play is Little Richard. There's no freedom like that among disc jockeys. In fact, in most places there are disc jockeys. You don't hear, the reason they don't tell you the time anymore or any of that, it's all programmed. It's all
So that's
computer.
one reason to have had children. Can you think of any others?
That's a good one. What's that?
They have a station here, KWVA.
Absolutely.
And,
Yeah.
That's my favorite radio station.
Remember when Joe was about 3 and just starting to learn how to talk, he came in one time and said, "Hey Dad, have you ever heard of Little Richard?" "Yes, I have, son."
Can I tell you a funny story?
Sure.
When my son turned 12, we gave him an electric guitar, and he's very excited. And he and his friend Forrest started a band. Unfortunately, the only instrument Forrest knew how to play was a ukulele. So they had an odd instrumentation. But he came home one day and he said, "Dad, Forrest introduced me to this guy, this really great guitar player." And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Led Zeppelin." And I said, "Well, that's not a guy, and it's not a new band." And he said, "He's not." And he said, "How old is Led?" We had this long time.
Yeah. It's like a Jethro Tull. He's great. Love that Jethro.
Which one is pink?
I'd be happy to chat about anything that's on your mind. Anything else?
What do you miss about magazine work?
A lot of people compare that kind of staff work to being like on a sports team, team. I was never much of an athlete, but I can see what it's like being in a band. There are bands where maybe none of the band members are necessarily virtuosos on their respective instruments, but the band is great. And then there are these so-called supergroups where every person is a virtuoso on his or hers, and there's something kind of lacking. What I miss deadlines, oddly enough, and I miss the collegiality, the camaraderie of these egos crashing into each other and coming up with something good, in the process of listening to each other, respecting each other, different points of view. Thank you so much.
Yeah, are there any guitar players nowadays that you're following and any noteworthy players that you can think of?
All the stuff that I loved when I was 10 years old, I still love. And that I thought that I would outgrow, I'll listen to it now. It's even better than I thought it was. I'm sure they're out there, but no, I don't come across them. I mean, to me, recent bands are like, well, I saw U2 in '84. They were the new guys. I know they're out there, but I'm still trying to. Probably if I could take B.B. King and Albert King and Freddie King and Chuck Berry and Keith Richards and Pete Townsend and move more into like a Robin Ford, more the modal, like what your new guitar player's doing. That's probably where I'd go. My own player.
You ever had an interview where you're just like too starstruck to ask questions or to come out like clearly?
Oh, what a great question. I've had examples where that could have happened. But because I did all the research ahead of time, I'm such a maniac for preparation. A friend of mine, Steve Fischel, said to me one time when I was going to interview Keith for the first time, he said, "Well, I know you know this, but here's a tip." He said, "Don't stare." And I tell my don't ever say, oh, you know, God, I'm so glad to be here, and I have all your records, oh my God, I can't believe I'm sitting here, you know, that just makes them uncomfortable. And so, even, I was telling my writing about the arts class the other day, the first time I met Eric, you know, it was a big thing for me. And I was, you know, really appreciate your sitting down with me, but this voice was screaming at me in my head, like, Eric Clapton, oh my God, it's Eric Clapton. So, yeah, you learn to just, I was up in the Keith Richards Hotel Suite one time, and Ron Wood blows in, just, you know, tons of energy. What do they do when they get together? They hang out and play guitar. So he hands me a guitar and he says, you play? What am I going to say? No. So I didn't jam with the Rolling Stones, but that's about as good. I did jam with Ron and Keith on piano. Yeah, you just kind of act like, yep, this is customary, just another day in the life, you know. But then you leave and you go, then you collapse, you go, God. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Who have you not interviewed that you would love to?
Oh, David Gilmour. And I didn't get a chance to interview Jimi Hendrix, who died while I was still in school, died in September 70. So some of the fellows who have passed on, I could have interviewed George Harrison, but being the responsible editor I was, I assigned it to someone who knew even more about George Harrison than I did. Those would have been some. I'm sure there were others. I would have liked to have interviewed Bo Diddley anytime between 1955 and 1970, for example, even before I started doing this.
And you mentioned Gilmour multiple times, and also Pete Townsend. There's that operatic version of
Absolutely.
rock music.
Majestic.
Yeah, and also the spectacle of it.
Yes.
The show and the themes.
Yes.
Could you give us some thoughts about that?
Well, I saw the Quadrophenia tour, and I just couldn't believe I was in the same room with these guys. And I saw The Wall. I saw Pink Floyd's The Wall, not the film, but The Wall, where they announced, I felt like such a jet setter. They announced, I must have read it in Rolling Stone or someplace, we have a stage set that is so elaborate and so big, we can't take it on the road. So we're going to do a week, I think it was in Madison Square Garden, and we're going to do a week in LA at the Forum. So you come to us. So I thought, I'm going. I was single, I had an income. I thought, I'll just go. And so I went to see The Wall, and that was the greatest experience of like theater rock. The Who, performing Tommy. I mean, it just, there is a, I think it's quite beautiful. I use the word operatic, I think that's perfect. There's a kind of, I mean, it's rip and rock and roll, but there's a kind of monumental quality to it. Like you really know you've seen something. Even my kids, I took them, I have a pal who works with The Who, and he said, look, you gotta come see him. This was years ago. Keith Moon, of course, who passed away several years ago, but he said, Zach Starkey, Ringo's son, is the new drummer. And he's kicking their butts. He said, if we get within 1,000 miles, you have to come see us. So they played the Gorge, and I took my kids up, and they were like, I don't know, like 7, 9, and 12. I mean, they were young. But I mean, to this day, they'll say, oh, we'll never see anything that great. They knew it, even when they were children. So yeah, I love that stuff. The Stones could be the same way. But a lot of my favorite stuff was in a club. Seeing Freddie King, where my table touched the stage. So I'd get there early. Like B.B. King would come into the Asheville, I'd go every night. You know, he'd play 3 nights, 4 nights. Of course I would go every single night. But one time I was seeing Freddie, and I was sitting at the table, and he's a big guy. And I remember banging my head on the table because I couldn't believe that anything is this great. So a lot of my most memorable experiences were at little clubs. I saw West Montgomery in a little club. Sat, again, I moved, every set, I moved up closer. I'd find a seat that was vacated. And I would just, I mean, he's almost such close, I was right. So yeah, small clubs. Yes, sir.
So I heard, I think I might have had this discussion with you. I heard James Taylor in a radio interview say that he never really made money on his records. It was hard for me to believe. So I guess the model, really hasn't changed. But I'm wondering now that concert ticket prices are so exorbitant.
Right.
Do you think that young people that's part, that the cost of actually even having these experiences like you just described is going to be prohibitive for this current generation?
Yet another aspect of the digital age in which we live, when you're recording your novel, your book, your poem, your photograph, your movie can be digitally copied, distributed globally at the touch of a button. It's harder than ever to make money off of records. Most records have always lost money. A few records would make enough money. You've got Neil Diamond, so you can support somebody else, or you can support 50 other artists. You've got Elton, so you can support all these others. But even David Bowie, who at the time was the richest rock star in the world, I would have thought it would have been Mick or one of the surviving Beatles, but David Bowie was worth almost $1 billion. Even he said, hope you like to tour, because they could see with the coming of MP3, digital transmission, the decline of vinyl, even CDs are like passe now. So yeah, it's all about putting people in seats. That's absolutely true. They're big bands who give their stuff away, sometimes in a really annoying way, like U2 on your cell phone. Remember we were trying to get that music off your phone? I'm saying, well, if you don't like it, why did you download this? And saying, I didn't download it. Yeah, it's U2's free. If you buy the phone, you get this. It's very much a part of the music industry right now. Yes, sir. Hi, Joe.
So you mentioned Wes Montgomery.
Yeah.
Do you have any other favorite jazz guitarists? Pat Metheny, John McLaughlin?
Oh man, I just did a thing with McLaughlin a couple of years ago. He plays Paul Reed Smith guitars now, so he's such a remarkable guy. But for me, it's just personal taste. There's Wes Montgomery, and there's everybody else. Yeah. Among everybody else, John McLaughlin he could be from another planet. I mean, he's a very down-to-earth guy. He's wonderful to talk to. A funny McLaughlin story. I don't know if you're familiar with the record called Friday Night in San Francisco. It's McLaughlin, it's Al Di Meola, and Paco de Lucia. So I was there at that concert, and I interviewed all three of them the next morning. And so I've been a fan of McLaughlin for a long time. Okay, so I just saw him a couple of years ago. And he is this very cosmopolitan European. He lives in Monaco or wherever it is, and everybody in his band is like, one guy is from Cameroon, and one of the percussionists is from Iran, and they're this incredibly multicultural, and they all smell good, and they wear designer clothes, and they're just, fabulous. But he went shopping, and he came back with a t-shirt that was a dog sitting down holding a bikini top, and it said, good dog. And he was really happy with this t-shirt. I just thought, no, man, that's not. So what I'm saying is getting to know these people a little bit, and they're not always, people are complex, you learn other facets to them. But yeah, Wes. Because I think he was blues-based, and the music makes sense to me, and it's just like hearing a great rapper or a conversation. I mean, he's talking to you. He really is. And yeah, that was a great thrill to see him and to talk to him. Any other questions? I know we're running low. Yes, hi, thank you.
What's the best way to find a band to play in?
What's the best way?
To find a band to play in.
To find a band to play in. What's the best way to find a band?
Join a band.
Well, I wish I knew, because The Deb Cleveland Band doesn't gig very much, and the last band that I was in for about 6 years, the leaders just decided that they want to do a duo, because it's hard to make money as like a 5-piece or a 6-piece. Fortunately, Eugene has a very positive network of musicians, so simply asking around, I mean, I don't think there's any, you want to play in a band? Yeah. Well, let's talk. I mean, I think the best thing you can do is talk to musicians, and let's find out what you want to do.
Why don't
And
you two start one?
and who else shows up? Yeah, there you go.
People who don't suck band.
Any other questions?
What was, one time you told me about Keith Richards, how he described his, was it his first Fender twin amp or the Fender twin amp, do you remember that?
Were you describing the amp?
Yeah, he made an analogy about the amp and a woman. Do you remember that one? It's like he fell in love.
Well, I remember there was one time he said, he was talking about all the amps he uses, but there's one he calls the wife. I don't know if that's what you're thinking of. Yeah, he wrote the foreword for my book about Fender amps, and so we've had a lot to say about that.
His deepest love or something along those lines.
What was it?
Something about it being his deepest love was his first.
I can't remember. But his whole thing is, the right guitar through the right amp. It's not like, oh, I've got a Hollywood, a full-time Hollywood sound guy. No. This guitar through that amp on this day, whether it's the weather, whatever else it is, and he'll line them all up, and he'll go through, he'll just play something like, oh, okay, on this day, this is the one. Using small amps turned up so their tubes are melting. You get a huge sound out of a small amp. That's kind of his things. I asked him about on one song, on the Take It So Hard, his amp is so loud in the studio that the snares on the drum are rattling. You can hear them before the drummer comes in. And I said, did you think about redoing it to get rid of that sound? He said, oh, no, we all like it. All right. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.